Hello everyone, it's Lotus Moon. Alright, so where we last left off with the fire team and the ponies of Equestria, the war was beginning. Let's see what will happen, judging by the title. I think it may be already apparent what's going to come next. So please enjoy. Fireteam Odium, written by Atranos the Last. Chapter 28, Liberation. Cabal blood splattered over Procor's armor as he killed his next enemy. As soon as the call to begin had come through, he had charged forward, his hands coated in arc energy. Seeing as the army behind him was slower than him, he figured he could pull some enemy fire away from them as they approached, a plan that had been working thus far. He rammed his fist into the chest of yet another legionary, its breastplate crumbling in with the power behind the attack. They had landed quite a few shots on him, but his arc light was doing well to hold it back. As he turned to face the rest of the Cabal, however, he came to the realization his plan wouldn't hold for much longer. 3 Goliaths could be seen advancing towards him and his allies at full speed. He quelled his surprise at the incoming machines, focusing on figuring out how to deal with them. He hadn't planned on them arriving so quickly, leaving him little time to prepare. As the closest Goliath came into firing range, he began running at them, ignoring the now less imposing foot soldiers that attempted to surround him. While the Cabal may have made these Goliaths faster, their weight would have been reduced in order to allow for the extra speed. Closing his eyes and praying he was right, he charged his arc energy as much as he could and leapt up above the tank. The explosion that followed was massive, blasting the plating of the machine apart. With the sheer amount of force and light behind the movement, as well as the lighter armor, the Goliath instantly deteriorated, spraying broken metal in a large circle around it. Rising up, he raised his gaze to look out at the remaining forces, swaths of soldiers still charging at him, and the other Goliaths had turned their focus to him. A quick glance to the top of his HUD revealed a flashing red bar. The combination of intense gunfire and an immense explosion had managed to break his shields, leaving him with only his physical armor to protect him. With so many enemy Cabal left, he had no choice but to play more defensively until his shield came back, something easier said than done when under masses of gunfire. Thankfully, however, his saving grace came in the form of a bright golden light that crossed the battlefield. It was enough to daze the Cabal, giving Procor time to regain his shielding and redistribute his light to where it was needed. When he was ready, he leapt from the wreckage, his body still covered in a shimmering blue energy. The still stumbling Cabal stood little chance to the Titan's renewed light, many falling before shots were fired once more. As he fought off the soldiers around him, Celestia moved from her position in the sky and started working on the remaining Goliaths that had slowed to regain their bearings. Her attack had worked far better than she had thought it would, and she wasn't complaining. It had given them an advantage, and anything they could use to get the upper hoof was a plus. Seeing as she hadn't used combat magic in many centuries, she focused more upon distracting the machines, firing blinding beams of magic into where she assumed the pilots of the machines were looking from. With her moving around and blinding them, they were unable to hit her, but their sense of pride and loyalty kept them trying. A seemingly endless volley of bullets and shells being fired from the many cannons. This changed, however, when a call from Procor drew her attention away. The ponies around her had mostly passed, almost all of them making it past the distracted Cabal and storming the wall. She gave Procor a quick nod, flying to follow the army and leaving the Titan to finish dealing with what remained of the infantry. Now that the princess had stopped dealing with the Goliaths, they turned their focus to Procor, firing everything they had at him. Explosions shook the ground around him, but he stood tall. The time Celestia had given him away from the machines was enough for him to regain his strength. The legionaries surrounding him not putting enough of a fight up to be an issue for him. He pushed Arclight back into his arms, running forward towards the closest tank and leaping up. Some of the soldiers near the Goliath quickly determined what he was doing and were lucky enough to move away in time. The drivers were not as fortunate. Like the last one, the force of his light crumpled the metal armor like paper, the ammunition on board detonating and throwing shrapnel around it. The Titan rose slowly from the wreckage, looking at the remaining Goliaths. Their weapons were pointed directly at him, but were holding fire, likely trying to get a shot that would keep friendly fire down to a minimum. Using the extra time wisely, he pushed more arc light outward, smiling as he readied for another slam. A few moments passed before he moved, jumping out at the enemy's vehicle. Its weapon rose quickly, firing a shot at the rapidly approaching Guardian, drawing a greater smile from him. This was going to be quick. Outside the battlefield, a group of Cabal dropships soared over the oceans. The ponies and Guardians on board had already prepared, awaiting the clearance to engage from their pilots. The rest of the Odium had been given brief updates through their comms, which Curvis listened to intently. Having knowledge of the battlefield was incredibly helpful to have beforehand, even if they weren't landing in the same spot as the battle that had been called. Arriving in 30 seconds, the Vogue said, jolting many soldiers up. Even with them being the lucky few that avoided the initial assaults upon the walls, they still had to deal with the anti-air and heavy resistance that awaited them when they reached their destination. Soon the crew bay doors of the ship opened, revealing the sea below them. It seemed that the defense force was so occupied with the other three walls, there was very little opposing them as they arrived. This didn't remove the threat of death entirely, as some of the automated defenses had already begun firing at them, but the fact that the wall wasn't covered in Cabal was enough to raise their spirits. Compelled by his drive to set things right, the Vogue was the first out of the ship, his heavily armored body slamming into the ground and kicking up a sizable cloud of debris. The sound of the ships, as well as the troops exiting them, drew the attention of some of the nearby Cabal enemy, who turned and began focusing their fire on the Vogue. None of them lasted long on the receiving end of his slug thrower, however, especially not when the pilots that dropped him off provided covering fire. Within moments, their landing area was clear, and the dropships had successfully delivered all of their troops. Curvis approached the Vogue as the Cabal leader slug thrower finished spitting down. Procor says he and Celestia have things handled on their end, the Guardian told him. Elena says she and Flamelight have just barely broken through, but they mostly made it. There's no word from Exodus, Chrome, and Luna yet, though. We should go to the north side and assist them there. What of the support force behind them? The Vogue asked. They are still inbound, Curvis responded. They should be coming up on the edge of the city soon, though. The Vogue nodded and turned to face his troops before calling commands to them in their native Cabal language. They responded immediately, setting off down the road ahead of the Vogue and Curvis, sweeping alleyways and buildings with their weapons as they went. After a few moments, Curvis went to take the head of the group, and they continued advancing. It wasn't long before word of their arrival began to spread. On the north side of Manhattan, things had deteriorated rather quickly as the equestrian army, led by Exodus, Princess Luna, and Chrome Shield, advanced towards the Cabal perimeter. On the side of the city, the ground had been soft enough for the Cabal to quickly construct rows of trenches outside the wall, allowing Cabal infantry to fire upon their enemy from a much more protected position. Dozens of ponies had already fallen to incoming gunfire, despite Chrome and his fellow shield unicorns' best efforts to protect them, and now they could advance no further due to a lack of fire support. Exodus and Chrome lobbed grenade after grenade into the trenches before them, but more and more infantry came out from behind the walls to replenish them. Rows of phalanxes, scion sniper teams, and hundreds of legionaries all fired on magic barriers that Chrome and his fellow unicorns had projected ahead of them. Cracks began to show. It was clear they'd have to either retreat soon or die to incoming fire. Exodus, growing tired of the stagnation, decided he had enough. He summoned his ghost in his hand. "Bring the ship in, weapons ready," he told it. "That should clear the way a little." The ghost nodded and disappeared from view once more. "Chrome," Exodus called to his ally over the roar of gunfire. "Tell the princess to prepare the ponies to advance." "Advance?" Chrome called back, a puzzled expression coming over him as he channeled more magic into maintaining his part of the barrier. "Sorry, but unless you've got something big that you've been holding back, that won't be an option." "Don't worry," Exodus responded. "Support is on the way." Chrome shrugged and ran off down the road to the Lunar Princess, who stood alongside her fellow ponies to keep the barrier strong. "Princess," he addressed her, "Exodus says to prepare our ponies to advance." "Advance?" she questioned. "That is not possible with enemy resistance like this." "That's what I told him too, Your Highness," Chrome said. "He says help is on the way, though." Indeed, it was only a few seconds later that the sound of approaching sub-lightspeed engines was heard, even over the gunfire. Moments later, Exodus's blue tripod-shaped Ceres galliot streaked overhead, its reef-made onboard weaponry carpeting the enemy's entrenchments. Dozens upon dozens of Cabal fell to the ship's fire as it made a few more passes overhead until the ammunition was depleted. Princess Luna, as well as Chrome and the other ponies in the group, watched in awe as the machine cleared out nearly all the enemy in their path. After a few moments, the alicorn cleared her head. "Advance!" she called to her fellow ponies in her signature royal Canterlot voice. The solid barrier separated into columns, each led by a unicorn protecting a barrier, advancing methodically to completely sweep the trenches and the enemy infantry, now more hesitant to come out from behind the wall. The different teams were able to reach the wall, and Exodus's ghost got to work on reopening the gate. Princess Luna looked over the ponies that made it across the field. Of the army that had entered the fields alongside her, only a couple dozen of them remained, and even some of those who survived had various wounds that would require attention. The medics that survived were doing their work as best they could, however. Steeling her resolve to appear strong for her ponies, she put off her grief for when the fate of her world was more secure. The Vogue, Curvis addressed the rogue Cabal leader as they cautiously advanced to the city. "Exodus just got in touch. They've taken heavy casualties, but they're on their way in now. We're going to meet up with them halfway to where they are." "The operation goes well," Val the Vogue nodded. "But something troubles me. We caused quite a disturbance on our arrival, yet the enemy has made no action against us. I'm beginning to suspect a trap." "Well, if that's the case, we can't turn around now," the Titan shrugged. "We'll just have to deal with whatever they throw at us." "Sir!" a centurion shouted as he rushed onto the bridge of the leader's flagship. Several squads stationed along the waterfront have failed to check in, and security cameras show that there is a large force of Rhodes legionaries, scions, and phalanxes proceeding through the streets, moving northward. There is also a guardian and what appears to be Val the Vogue among them. "What are your orders?" "We will suffer no more intrusions, least of all from that turncoat," Primus Veal muttered, already frustrated with his enemy's attempts to remove his forces from the city. Kill them all. No prisoners and no hesitation. Yes, sir, the centurion saluted, before heading back to do as his primus instructed. One of the scions in the Vogue's group stopped in place for a moment, listening intently. Hold, I hear enemy communications close by, she reported to the rest of her group. Instantly, the rogue Cabal force, as well as Curvis and the Vogue, took cover behind walls, barriers, and various pieces of Cabal equipment, waiting for the scion to report more. 30 meters out, the scion updated, raising her weapon and scanning the streets in front of her. The others were doing the same, scanning over doors, alleys, windows, anywhere an enemy could obtain a shot on them. A few moments of eerie quiet passed, the only sounds being the soldiers' controlled breathing and the clamor of gunfire and battle echoing through the streets from other parts of the city. None dared move for fear of an ambush. Slaughter them! The booming voice of a centurion roared through the streets as packs upon packs of war beasts began pouring onto the streets, led by legionary beastmasters, growling and running towards the invading rogue Cabal. As the Vogue and Curvis opened fire on the new enemies, and their soldiers did the same, the roar of heavy engines grew louder as interceptors also closed in on them. The first casualty was an unfortunate legionary who was mauled to death by 4 of the Cabal attack animals. As his blood poured onto the street from his neck, torso, and legs, a friend, a phalanx, let out a terrible roar and smashed his shield into the face of one of the nearby beasts. The beast was killed instantly as its skull and neck shattered, the sheer force behind the shield sending it careening through the air until it collided with one of the beastmasters, killing him as well. After holding position to block incoming fire from an interceptor, he spun around and swung his shield into the air, then swiftly down onto the head of another beast that had been attacking an incapacitated scion, knocking it off and smashing its head against the pavement. As the scion looked around and gathered its wits, he found himself staring down the barrel of an interceptor's cannon as its pilot took aim on him and his squad. The pilot's head suddenly erupted in a spray of blood and pressurized fluids as Curvet's pulse rifle delivered a precise blast directly to his face. The interceptor fell idle as its pilot slumped sideways out of the seat. Seeing an opportunity, the scion called for his squad nearby to give him covering fire as he left cover, sprinting down the street to the vehicle. The cacophony of gunfire started anew behind him as soon as he left. Arriving at the interceptor a few seconds later, he shoved the legs of the dead pilot out of the seat and climbed in, starting it back up. Its controls reported all systems to be functional, prompting the scion to smile behind his helmet's faceplate. Grasping the control sticks in his hands, he turned the interceptor to face the centurion commanding the ambush and pulled the triggers. A volley of rockets soared through the air towards the unsuspecting centurion, shattering his shield after a second and shattering his body a couple seconds later. Curvis fired another burst into the body of a beastmaster, puncturing his armor and the organs beneath it, leaving him to stumble, clutching at his wound until he fell forward, lifeless. This only served to make his war beast packs all the more furious, the dozens of animals unleashing roars and snarls as they set off sprinting towards the Titan, ignoring any obstacle in their path, including other enemies. Curvis aligned his light into its solar form, his body igniting into flames as a hammer of solid light formed in his hand. He hurled it at the approaching beast horde, and it exploded as it hit the center of the pack, killing several of them. The ones that survived reached him right as a new hammer formed, and he delivered it to the side of the war beast as it leapt at his head, jaws gaping. The beast's body incinerated on contact, and Curvis threw his hammer again, killing another 3. The Vogue, seeing one of his allies nearly overwhelmed, turned in place and loosed a large stream of bullets into the remaining beast before he jolted forward onto his knees. An entire pack of war beasts set upon him, biting at his armor as he was forced to kneel under their weight. He prompted his suit to activate a special modification. The shockwave generator on his back hummed to life and after a couple seconds released his energy, sending the animals flying off of him in all directions, colliding with buildings or simply launching them into the air, killing them on impact with walls or the ground. As he stood once more and recovered his weapon, he noticed that the gunfire and noise had died down. Looking around, he saw no hostiles standing, but fewer allies remaining as well. They had, however, gained some new assets. 2 of his soldiers had procured interceptors from the enemy, and both looked to be in good condition. "Take stock of yourselves," he called to his soldiers. "We move in 1 minute." "Are you alright?" Curvis asked him as he approached. "I saw you had a pretty hard time towards the end." "Given our personal afflictions, I am surprised you care for my well-being," the Vogue observed. "But I am well, thank you." "Don't mention it," Curvis shrugged. "Guardians look after their allies, right?" The Vogue nodded in response. After a few moments, his remaining soldiers reported that they were ready, and they set off marching north once again. At the north end of the city, with the main gate open, the secondary force of ponies and frames began to enter the city to meet up with Exodus Chrome Shields and Princess Luna's division, who had overrun and taken shelter in a vehicle depot while awaiting their reinforcements. Many of them wanted to move further into the city and avenge their fallen comrades, but their leaders' cooler heads prevailed. "'Tis a shame we cannot make use of these vehicles," Princess Luna remarked as she examined one of the several Goliath tanks in the room. "This would prove to be quite the asset." "Well, I sent the frames instructions on using Cabal consoles, as we taught the ponies how to do so," Exodus said. "When they get here, we'll see about putting them to good use." "That'll help put some of us at ease," Chrome nodded, looking over at a group of ponies stewing in anger over their fallen friends. "We'll see," Exodus shrugged. "Either way, it's good that they've got strong feelings. It'll drive them to fight harder." "It is only a tragedy that these feelings came in the way that they did," Luna sighed. "Don't worry, Princess," Chrome said to her. "Our victory here later today will honor them." Exodus was about to add his own comment when a new and entirely synthetic voice came into his comms. "Guardian, reinforcements have arrived," the voice of a frame stated as several squads of armed frames entered the building. His group of ponies turned to look at them as they came in. "There are 50 frames here at your disposal." "Wow, actual robots," a pony said. "Actually, in light of everything else going on, fighting alongside robots isn't that far-fetched," replied another. "You've all received instructions on operating Cabal consoles, the same as the ponies." Exodus addressed the frames. "Can you help operate these tanks?" "Affirmative," the group replied, speaking in complete unison. Immediately, they moved towards their vehicles, making sure they were fueled and loaded before beginning to climb into their new crew compartment. Joining the ponies already stationed inside, one by one the tank's engines came to life as they rose above the ground, their cannons swiveling to test their mobility. "Oh, this is going to be a great time," Chrome smirked as he readied his tank's anti-infantry machine gun. "All mobile armor operational, Guardian," the frames reported to Exodus. "You have 6 unassigned frames remaining." "They can stay on foot with me and the others," Exodus ordered. "Let's move out." The 6 frames saluted in response, chambering their auto rifles. "You heard 'em, ponies," Sergeant Chrome called out. "Let's get going." The ponies stood to their hooves and steeled themselves for war once again. "Sir," one of Vale's scion flares said calmly to his superior, "there's been a break-in at our mobile armor depot, and the ambush force has gone off comms. Additionally, our other garrisons on the ground across the city are being routed. Our forces are too close to the enemy for our ships to provide fire support, and there is no realistic way to extract them. What are your orders?" Vale thought for a moment as he looked out of the bridge at the chaos below. It was a curious thing to him that these animals had rallied so readily and so effectively against him. Contemplations aside, he must continue his mission and deliver his cabal back to their empire. "Contact the other fleet captains," he said. were enacting a new plan and heading to orbit. Those on the ground are ordered to fight until they die and take as many hostiles with them as they can. They will all be remembered on our return to the Empire. Yes, sir. The Flayer saluted as he went off to contact the other ships in the fleet and relay his Primus's orders. Down on the ground, additional frames and equestrian army reinforcements had arrived. The morale was slowly on the rise once again. Between this and a heavy fire support from the stolen Goliaths, the Alicorns flying in to wreak havoc with their magic, and the Guardians wielding their light, the hostile Cabal numbers were beginning to quickly diminish. Suddenly, the army seemed to switch strategy all at once. Instead of acting tactically and carefully, they seemed to throw caution to the wind. Phalanxes threw down their shields to fire recklessly but devastatingly on the enemy, even more ponies dying to their hail of bullets. Legionaries armed all their grenades at once and ran screaming towards squads of ponies and frames, detonating once they arrived at their target, killing even more. Scions overloaded their abilities and detonated in explosions of their mysterious energy, disrupting any unicorn magic in a wide radius and bringing down their shields. These suicide assaults were quickly crushed, but not after several dozen more ponies and frames lay dead or severely injured. What the hell's the strategy change all of a sudden? Procor asked as he dragged an injured pony behind cover. Wouldn't it be better to surrender and get a chance at living? I'm not sure, Extus responded as he felt a charging legionary before he reached his target, his grenades all detonating a few seconds later. But it can't be a good thing. Ghost, can you pick up anything on our comms? One moment, his ghost said. After a few moments, he spoke up once more. I have just intercepted a transmission from the Primus and his fleet captains. The fleet's about to break for orbit. We'll lose all those prisoners and probably our orbital support from Churchill, Curvis added. We can't let them escape, but we can't have Churchill shoot them down or everyone on board will die. The vehicles your frames stole seem to have good enough range, Celestia stated as she landed in cover nearby. Why not have them fire on their ship's engines? That could work, Exodus's ghost confirmed. I'll relay that to the frames. A moment passed before the frames spoke up. Orders received. Targeting enemy's propulsion. The Goliath cannons all pivoted to take aim on the ship's engines and let loose their payloads. It took a few moments for the shells to travel, soaring skyward towards Cabal engines. When the shots connected, and they all did, as the frames were mathematically precise in their aim, the engines they hit exploded in fireballs of burning fuel and chemicals. This was repeated for all remaining engines, the Alicorns contributing their own beams of intensely concentrated magic, which sliced through the exterior fuel lines and ran their fuel dry. Engine disabling operation complete, the frames reported. Gravitational lift systems are uncompromised. Ships will hold current position unless repairs are undertaken. They're dead in the air, Elena confirmed, after checking over all the ships with her rifle scope. Let's get up there while we still can. Princesses, we're going to need a teleport up there, Curvis addressed the Alicorns. We can't fly or they'll shoot us down. We'll prepare a teleport. Celestia nodded as she and her sister's horns began to glow. We'll be sending you in several waves, since there are so many of you. Ready when you are, princesses, Procor confirmed as he readied his crucible-branded machine gun. I've been waiting so long to use this thing, he thought to himself. He'd soon have the opportunity. And thus concludes Chapter 28 to Fireteam Odium. Okay, so of course I didn't think it would immediately end with this chapter, but it is getting pretty good and we only have 2 more chapters to go. The next chapter, well, we'll see when that comes around. For right now, I am Lotus Moon and I want to wish you all a good morning, afternoon, evening, or night wherever you are, every pony. Good night.